Advocate Muzi Sikhakhane is my guest on the program this morning. Advocate Sikhakhane, good morning.
Good morning, Kolan, and your listeners.
Thanks indeed for coming through. Also on the other line, I'm joined by Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi. He is COSATU's General Secretary. Mr. Vavi, good morning.
Good morning, Perpetua, and good morning to the professor and all of the listeners.
Thank you very much for your time. Let me start again with you, Advocate Sikhakhane, to develop this point further. You are calling for the categorization of corruption as a crime, as a treason.
Well, Kolani, let me give you two theories for what I was saying. First of all, let me indicate that I was making a speech about all sorts of things in memory of Arthur Chaskalson. So
Sure.
Our corrupt citizens must not think I was singling them out for punishment. The legal theory is that in South Africa, treason derives from Roman Dutch law. And therefore, one has to look at how it has evolved from the 43 BC in Rome under Tiberius, that actually at different times, those societies have changed the offenses, have included so many things in the list of offenses called treason. It all depended on what society at that time was facing. For instance, there was a time when to imagine yourself in love with the king's daughter was categorized as treason.
Sure.
During English Reformation, very early, being a Catholic priest, unless you leave in 40 days, you leave or take an oath of allegiance to the Queen, was categorized as treason. So the point I'm saying is that societies have always looked at what is it that it's threatening the stability of their state in order to categorize it as corruption. So that's the legal basis, Kolani.
In order to categorize it as treason?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any offense. And they've even counterfeiting notes was categorized at some point as treason. The biggest trials of treasons in South Africa happened during the South African War between 1899 and 1902. So it's not new. We've always added the list. But let me give you my political theory about this.
Okay.
One is that we usually say that treason is the highest offense against government or against the state.
Yeah.
Because you change one government and replace it with another. I'm arguing, Kolani, that actually some forms of corruption are worse than toppling a government. Because theoretically what you do when you engage in certain forms of corruption, you are not only changing a government, you are actually creating a situation where that state is permanently incapable of delivering to its citizens. So actually it doesn't matter what government you put in place. Once you've allowed the state to be compromised so much so that it can no longer deliver what its mandates are throughout, it doesn't matter what governments you put in place, then you've put that state in jeopardy forever. And the last point, Kolani, I want to say here is this. 2 incidents of corruption in South Africa have happened and have gone on unpunished. And I want to start there because sometimes we discuss corruption as if it's a new phenomenon. The biggest 2 incidents of corruption in the history of South Africa are, colonialism. That's the first one. It went unpunished. Apartheid itself went unpunished because its leaders live comfortably wherever they are. And so we must see corruption in that pattern as a pattern that develops in the body politic because colonialism and apartheid went unpunished. And it continues in post-colonial and post-apartheid states because of that history.
I just want to go back to the point then that you make about some forms of corruption being worse than treason. Do we have those today in South Africa? Are there examples of the forms of corruption that you think are worse than treason?
I don't think we're there yet, Kolani, but I think we're going there. And that is why I'm raising this point, because I have seen in a lot of initiatives by citizens, by the government, to make sure that it categorizes corruption as a special crime. And there are many statutes in South Africa that you find that indicate that there are initiatives that government itself sees this as a problem. What I'm saying, I'm developing that theme to say, actually, you need to develop it to a point where it becomes, I don't have the English word for this, Xolani, but in Zulu we call it ichilo. It becomes one of those deep shames to engage in, because actually, in simple terms, corruption is theft by the well-off, stealing from the most vulnerable. That's what it is in basic, simple terms. It's people who are well-off, stealing from the most destitute. It's like you going to traffic lights wherever at the intersections and taking money from the beggars who will sleep without food tonight.
But you also talk about statutes. Do we not have enough existing codes, statutes that are adequate to deal with this kind of corruption?
I think we do, Xolani, we do. I just think we need to add this. What I'm arguing is not a replacement. It's actually an addition to those sorts of initiatives that I think government and other serious institutions of our state have tried. But I still think you need to ensure that you stop in their tracks those people who seek to frustrate even those procedures, because once you categorize a particular act along those lines, people tend to think twice before they do it. And secondly, the what you will see when you've put it along those lines to categorize it as treason is that you're going to limit the abuse of political parties, of state institutions, by people who, I think you were discussing it with your other guest the other day, who are trying to create or participate in what Aubrey and Mwelezi were calling the deep state. Because once you leave it unchallenged, you will reach a point where the state is incapable of delivering, but worse still, is incapable of producing genuine leaders of moral rectitude, because they will all be vetted by the confluence of political elites, economic elites, and criminal elites acting together.
So you think the deterrent is the sentence? Because ultimately, what will happen is if you categorize it as treason, you will also attract the heaviest sentence available.
Well, yes, Xolani, as long as we know that it's not you don't have a single bullet approach to this. You know, this is going to be an issue that society must confront on different fronts. I am not suggesting that categorizing it as treason is the only thing that will work. I think the other initiatives by the Anti-Corruption Forum, Corruption Watch, the South African government and its statutes, the political parties themselves, the ruling party, the ANC, has spoken openly about corruption. I think we need to engage in much more serious discussion about the nature of corruption and what it does to what the ANC calls the National Democratic Revolution. I think it frustrates the most sensitive stage of that democratic revolution, which is the time when a ruling party that is a post-liberation ruling party needs to deliver on the promises of freedom to the ordinary citizens of South Africa.
Mr. Vavi, let me bring you in. And I know you've spoken publicly about this issue so many times, but again, the issue is whether or not people understand and that the country understands the seriousness of corruption in this country.
I think so. Increasingly, this has become a preoccupation of almost every South African, except, of course, those who benefit from it. But you can go everywhere, in the media, if you read the newspapers, in every meeting of any organization, and in every social media, everywhere. People are absolutely concerned about the devastating impact corruption has on our society, precisely because corruption has become now the biggest threat to our future. And if we can't tackle it, then it means that our whole future will be stolen from us by an elite that is acting in cohorts with each other in order to benefit. So I agree with Advocate Sikhakhane that indeed this is primarily a program of the elite, sometimes sophisticated, sometimes very blatant, to steal from the poor. Basically, that's how COSATU have characterized it, and therefore we have championed a policy that says we ought to put an array of measures to ensure that, firstly, there is a sufficient deterrent, and secondly, there is a capacity to expose, isolate, and deal with those that are stealing from the poor.
Would you then concur or support the proposition made by Advocate Sikhakhane that perhaps then we should use the law, develop our laws, and deal with this perhaps as a treason?
Well, I'm not sure about calling it a treason, but I must share this with you that I once heard a minister, I won't say that minister now, and who was absolutely frustrated about the devastating impact of corruption in one province. And he said, in his view, there can be no better example of a treason, and against the people of that province, based on what the damage was going to be in terms of the standards of their living. So indeed, you can easily categorize certain forms of corruption, in particular by the powerful and acting in tandem with the big players in the private sector as some form of a treason. Indeed, treason is about sabotaging the future of a country.
Yeah, all right, let's take calls, find out what people think about this. 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. What do you think about the suggestion by Advocate Muzi Sikhakhane? But are there examples elsewhere, Advocate Sikhakhane, where corruption has been categorized as treason?
No, not exactly, Kulani, but all states, you go to Denmark and France and Germany, and what people have been doing over the years is to develop special procedures to deal with corruption. And I think what that indicates to me is that all states recognize that the usual criminal codes that are designed to deal with those acts that one calls corruption are not enough. You need to push the boundaries all the time in order to make sure that you deal with the ubiquitous nature of corruption and where it raises its head. So there are no countries that have categorized it that way. But you will see that special statutes, and that includes South Africa, by the way. I think South Africa has grappled with this problem and is serious about it and has developed statutes that deal with it. But as like all laws, people find a way. You need to deal with the what's happening in your body politic in order to deal with it. You need to deal with the morality of it and why people do it. So while there is no country that has done it, but I think different countries have placed or enacted special statutes for this, and South Africa is one of them. And I think we can still push the boundaries a bit about certain forms of corruption.